fantastic colleagues, friends. Welcome to Medical Research. I'm Dr. Van Kassel. Welcome you to video. I would like to tell you that the opportunities in this campus stretch beyond video, also within the College of Medicine, that I have a pleasure and honor be a Vice Dean of Research, looking both after colleagues who do the medical health research and also graduate students, those colleagues who want to do the master's or PhD degree. So if you, at the end of this session, you would like to know more about the University of Saskatchewan College of Medicine, do not hesitate to contact me, because also I am a little bit biased when it comes to the careers in research. How biased I am? Well, even more when I introduce today to you our fantastic speaker. Our today's speaker is Dr. Louis Kay. And Dr. Louis Kay received from the most prestigious research foundation in Canada, which is called the Gairdner Foundation, Biomedical Research Award, Canada Gairdner International Award for the development of modern nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy for studies of biomolecular structure, dynamic, and function, including applications to molecular machines and rare protein conformation. It's like a mouthful, but I'm sure that the Louis will describe to you in a great term. Dr. Kay is one of the most prestigious Canadian biomedical scientists. Formerly, he is a professor in the Department of Molecular Genetics, Biochemistry and Chemistry, University of Toronto. And he's also a senior scientist in an incredibly prestigious Canadian organization, which is Hospital for Sick Kids, for sick children in Toronto, Canada. So I am giving the floor to a fantastic researcher and lovely colleague, Dr. Louis Kay. Louis, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure for me to be here today. I want to begin by asking you guys a question, and I want an honest answer. I probably will ask you this question at the end of my talk to see how successful I was. How many of you think that you might want to be scientists? Just a show of hands. So there's kind of hands that are pulsating. That means that you're not certain, but there's some definite hands that are going up. Okay, so my job today, in addition to trying to give you a little bit of a flavor of what I do, is to make sure that those hands that were up stay up, and those hands that were pulsating also go up. So let's see if I do my job today, and you can decide. So I want to begin by asking you a few more questions. I want to know how many of you are fascinated by science and math. Okay, so several of you like science and math. How many of you find that science is too cookbook? I mean, you probably have some teachers in the audience, and so you don't want to sort of jeopardize the possibility of getting a 99 in your chemistry or physics or whatever you're studying. But how many of you find that science is kind of cookbook? Only one of you. Well, that's great. And I've already asked you about how many of you would like to become scientists. And the last question is, why am I asking so many stupid questions? So the reason is because I have two kids. They're a little bit older than you now. One is 26, actually doing his PhD, not in biomedical research, but in engineering and material science. And I have a daughter who's 21. But when my 26-year-old was in your shoes, when he was back in high school, he told me that science was boring. Now, both of his parents are scientists, practicing scientists, but what he said is that English is way better. He said that English is way better. How many of you think that English is way better than science? Okay, that's fair. Now, he said you could be really creative in English, right? You have to write an essay. You know, it's the first day of September, you're eager to be back in school, your English teacher says just write a 500-word essay on what you did this summer. And you can be creative because you're given a blank page and you can fill it up, right, with whatever you want. And there's lots of different ways that you can do that. Now, science, on the other hand, is not particularly creative in high school, right? How many of you have taken chemistry in high school? Your grades, what, 10, 11, 12? 12, okay, good. So you've done chemistry, you know, you take a solution that's 20 mils and you add some compound and you have to stir it vigorously for a few minutes and decide whether it gives off heat or takes in heat. Does it feel hot or does it feel cold? And whether there's a color change. And then you have to write a report about why all of this is important. And I can guarantee you, you are not the first people who have done this experiment. Those that graduated last year did it as well, and so forth. But what I want to do today is to tell you that science is in fact really creative. We don't all simply stir beakers for our careers. And if you're curious and hardworking and clever, it may just be for you. Now let's come back to writing that first essay of your grade 12 year on September 5th or whatever. Now the process is creative, I agree with you, but think about how it became creative. You had to know something about grammar. You have to use words. And you've been working with those words and learning grammar for 17 or 18 years. You've been practicing to write that high school essay for a long time. And in fact, it's all based on a 20-volume Oxford English dictionary, which has entries for 171,476 words. And I know that because I actually counted them myself. And if you take into account the fact that there are nouns and verbs and adjectives, the number is probably closer to 750,000. So that's a hell of a lot of, you have a question? Well, actually, I got my students to do it for me. Okay, so before you write that essay, you have to know a lot of words, right? There's a lot of words that you have to put down on the piece of paper, and you have to play by the rules of the game. Now, I'm a physical chemist and a physicist. There's only 118 elements. So there's hardly any elements compared to the number of words. So you can see just by this simple argument, chemistry is a lot easier than English. Now, let me give you an example. Let's suppose that you take the example of football. How many of you guys play football or gals? Okay, and you like football, right? Really like football. But think about how hard football is when you talk about rules of the game, right? And you guys are just in high school. Wait till you get to the NFL and start making, $40, $50, $60 million a year. I mean, in football, and this is NFL football, and again, I know this because after I finished counting all the words in the Oxford Dictionary, I then counted all of the plays in a typical NFL playbook. There's roughly 30 run plays and 200 pass plays. And there's at least 5 or 6 variations on each play. So that makes over 1,000 plays. And you're executing them at top speed, right? You don't just sort of go through the motions when, there's a big trophy on the line. And at some stage you're going to get smushed by somebody who weighs 300 pounds and is made of steel, right? You guys understand this? So here's somebody who's going to be smushed, and here's somebody who has been smushed, right? And there's a lot of plays, 1,000 plays. This is really a difficult concept. Football is hard, just like English. Chemistry, how many elements are there in chemistry? 118. So chemistry is easy. And chemistry is also kind of nice. I mean, look at this, gold. Gold is a commodity that's going up on the stock market. Bismuth, copper, sodium, when in the presence of oxygen, it ignites. So there's a lot of neat things that you can do, including making money with some of the elements, really important elements. So I promise you what will be the final question until the final question at the end. Would you rather read a chemistry textbook, which has only 118 elements? Would you prefer to read, say, 20 volumes of the Oxford English Dictionary? Or would you rather be tackled by somebody who just happens to weigh in at about 300 pounds and is about 6 foot 5 inches? So maybe science is not that bad after all, right? Now, whatever you do takes a lot of training, whether it's football, whether it's accounting, whether it's being a teacher, whether it's being a scientist, whether it's being a surgeon, a lawyer. And I want to tell you a little bit about what it is that I do and why you should even care. Okay, I'm at the crossroads of physics and biochemistry. I try to invent ways and invent technologies that allow us to solve hard problems in biology, in particular dealing with the molecules of life. I want to understand how the molecules of life dance around in our bodies, carrying out functions when they're properly put together and carrying out misfunctions when they're not. Now, when I was your age, I have to admit, I wasn't terribly interested in most things. I liked mathematics very much, and English class to me was when I put my math book under my desk and I solved math problems. And it later caught up when I actually had to write an exam to go and do my PhD in the US called the Graduate Record Entrance Exam, and I got 65% on the English section. So what I want to tell you today, the disclaimer is that I know by the end of this little 40-minute presentation, you're all going to be super excited about science and math, but I don't want you to just forget about English, okay? So no math textbook under your English class desk. You've got to focus on everything. Now, what is it that we actually focus on? What is it that scientists look for? We look for patterns. We look for patterns in nature. Let's suppose that I would ask each of you, what's the sum of the first 100 numbers? How would you go about doing it? Would you say, well, 1 plus 2 is 3, plus 3 is 6, plus 4 is 10, plus 5 is 15, etc. That would take you some time, right? So that's not really looking for patterns. Let's see if we can do it by looking for patterns. Suppose that you wanted to look at the first 10 natural numbers, and the first 10 natural numbers are 1, 2, 3, 4 to 10, and you wanted to sum them. Well, again, you could do 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, but what if you did 1 plus 10? What's that? 11. What's 2 plus 9? How about 3 plus 8? How about 4 plus 7? 5 plus 6? Getting a little bit redundant. How many 11s have we actually got? 5. 5 times 11 is 55. So what's the sum of the first 100 numbers? 101, 101, 101, and there's 50 of those. 5,050. So that rather than simply summing one number after the other, which is boring and not really very intellectual, we look for patterns that help us understand the real world. May not be in terms of these math numbers, but in terms of how things are put together to get a final answer. Now, I also wanted to look at important things and patterns. Admittedly, I still haven't gotten there. But when I was your age, I wanted to cure cancer. But I had this problem. I really loved math. So the question was, how can I combine math with curing cancer? Okay? And that's sort of what I want to talk to you about today, is finding myself in terms of what I really like, what I'm strong at, which is the mathematics and physics world, but at the same time applying it to biochemical systems, which are, of course, of utmost importance. Now, if I'm totally honest, I haven't figured out how to combine math with cancer, although other smarter people are doing that. But what I want to do is I want to tell you a little bit about my path, my discoveries, more about myself and what I can do to contribute to the vast sea of knowledge. I want to tell you today about how I can combine my love of math and physics with how stuff in the cells work. And before I tell you about that, I'm going to probably just review things that you already know since you're in grade 12. I'm going to describe a little bit about the movers and shakers inside the cell. How many of you have taken grade 12 biology or are taking grade 12 biology? So there's some of you, but not everybody. So let me just review the basics of genetics in the cell. So here we have a cell at the top. My pointer is really annoying. So we have a cell that's at the top, as you can see. And the cell contains genetic information in the nucleus, and the genetic information is of the form of chromosomes. And these chromosomes have instructions for making proteins. And these proteins are going to be the movers and shakers inside the cell. There's not hardly a single function that the cell does that does not involve proteins. And here are some of the beautiful pictures of these proteins. They come in different sizes, in different shapes, and they carry out biological functions. But they're coded by DNA, which in turn becomes RNA, which in turn is going to be translated into what we call proteins. And proteins are things that I study. So let's look at that a little bit and see what we can learn about proteins. Well, antibodies. Antibodies are going to be proteins. And we know about antibodies, especially in the post-pandemic era. These antibodies are going to be proteins that are going to recognize the difference between self and invaders and are going to deal with the invaders, whether they're bacteria, whether they're viruses. Cellular messengers can be proteins. If a cell has to know what's on the outside to function what's going to be on the inside, it needs messengers which are going to transport the message. That's often in the form of receptors, which are protein molecules. Muscles are going to be made up of various protein molecules called actin and myosin. Hair and nails are made up of proteins. Blood has a very important protein called hemoglobin. Hemoglobin binds oxygen and carries oxygen to all of your organs. Try living without breathing. Try living without getting oxygen to all of your organs. It's kind of hard to do. These are really important proteins. Your brain and nerves are made up of proteins. They're made up of proteins that like receptors that are going to receive stimuli from various ions. Enzymes are proteins. Reactions that would take essentially the age of the universe can be done in literally seconds through the help of enzymes. Enzymes are really important. If you think that you're having a bad, sluggish day, imagine what it would be like if your enzymes weren't working. And also cellular construction workers. Those are going to be huge proteins. Front-end loaders of the cell are proteins as well. So proteins don't do all of the work. I mean, I'm a protein-centric person, so I like proteins. They don't do everything, but they do a lot of the work. And you go from DNA to these proteins, and then the proteins carry out specific functions. And given the importance of proteins, what I want to do is look at them in detail. So I want to look at the shapes of proteins and try to understand them. Now, have you all studied about amino acids in biology? Okay, so let me just give you a very quick review. Let's suppose that we have a string and we have beads on the string. We have roughly 20 different colors. I don't have all 20 of them here, but there's roughly 20 different colors of beads on a string. Now, these beads are not inert. They're called amino acids. They come in different flavors, roughly 20 different flavors, but these amino acids are going to interact with each other in different ways. For example, it may be that these two amino acids are going to touch each other. They like each other. Maybe one is plus and one is minus. We know what happens when we have a plus charge and a minus charge. They tend to attract one another. And there are certain amino acids that want to avoid one another. So you can imagine that if you have beads on a string, they're going to arrange one another in such a way as to form perhaps a three-dimensional structure where we can bring the things that want to be in contact with one another, the things that don't want to be in contact, not in contact with one another. That imbues on these proteins beautiful structures. And here's one of such structure. This protein is called calmodulin. Calmodulin binds calcium. It's a really important messenger in the cell, very important protein. And the proteins change shapes. Proteins are like humans. They don't just sit there. They move around. We're not at absolute 0 Kelvin. We're at 298 Celsius, or 298 Kelvin, sorry. And as a consequence, we're moving around. Okay, we're moving and shaking, and we bind to other protein molecules. So here you have the protein. The protein binds to another protein, and it undergoes a change in its shape. So proteins can recognize other protein molecules. Here's an antibody, and these wings on the antibody, if you like, are going to recognize foreign materials and invoke an immune response. Proteins can also be machines. This is a macroscopic machine that you have in your car, but proteins are also machines. They just happen to be microscopic machines. Proteins can be involved in printing money. The cellular currency is called ATP. Proteins can be involved in directing cells, in steering cells, for example, towards food or away from danger. So proteins can be, if you want, the steering wheels. Proteins can serve as gates, just like gates keep some things out and some things in. And just like if you have a password, you're allowed to go through a gate. The same thing, ion channels. Sometimes ion channels are going to be closed. Sometimes they're going to be open, but they're open only for specific ions, for ions of the right size that can then come into a cell. And proteins are involved in reading messages, for example, and in converting the message into action. So here's a protein, actually a series of proteins and nucleic acid. It reads something called mRNA, and it produces other proteins, which then carry out function. So proteins do a lot of things. They also serve as garbage cans. There are molecular garbage cans. Here's something called the proteasome, which is one of the proteins that we study in my lab. It's a huge thing. There's a lot of garbage in the cell. It's really important. You could imagine, for example, if garbage people go on strikes, what the situation is like. Well, imagine if your garbage cans didn't work in a cell. You can get all sorts of diseases. You can get cancer. You can get neurological diseases. So garbage cans are really, really important. And that's one area that we study. And you can see, and this is sort of a big protein, a big garbage can, and a tiny little protein. This is the first one that I showed you called calmodulin. So a very small protein. So they come in different sizes, in different flavors, in different assortments. They carry out different functions, but many of them are really, really important. Now, protein molecules are not static. Just like you're not static, you have arms and legs, you move them periodically. Perhaps not those of you who are sleeping right now, but in general, you move them. And you can't capture function in just a single picture, right? If I were to take a picture of you, would I know everything about you? No, I would know hardly anything about you. And the same thing with molecules. We can get beautiful pictures of them, but we still don't know how they work. And we don't know how they misfunction when there are mutations. So what I try to do is to understand how these pictures change as a function of time. That's my real interest. And why does that matter? And let me illustrate. So again, we have an engine of a car, which is, in this case, a static picture. We don't get very much information. We have an engine in the cell. This molecule, again, it's static, and we have very little information. What I want to do is I want to create a movie, either of the car or of the molecule, so that I can understand how function occurs. Now, let me illustrate that further, why static pictures are troublesome. So let's suppose that you had never seen a baby before. Okay, this is your first experience with babies. And this is the only pictures that you have on babies. What could you conclude about babies? You would conclude that babies always are wearing something that's green. Now, these babies are happy, right? And they're wearing green, and they can feed themselves so well. You have to conclude that on the basis of this evidence. You all agree with me? Show of hands. Who agrees with what I'm saying? Okay. Not everybody. Now, then we go to the next picture. Okay, now it's clear that babies don't always feed themselves in the most opportune way, as you can clearly see, but they're still happy. And they don't always wear green things, which is a good thing because it would get very dirty and become red. Now I show you another picture. Baby's really unhappy. Okay? So as I make all of these pictures, you're getting a better view on what babies are all about. And if I were to put things together as a function of time, following a whole bunch of different babies, at the end of the presentation, you would probably understand what a baby is a lot better than if I just showed you 5,000 static structures. And the same thing happens with molecules. Okay? Now, we need multiple states to understand babies, because babies exist in multiple different conformations, if you like, multiple different ways, poses in which they can find themselves in. But also the same thing happens with protein. So here we have a protein. This protein is going to react with a little substrate in blue, and you can see what happens is that we're going to cleave the substrate. But what had to happen was not only did the protein have to find the substrate, the red and blue molecules had to find each other, which requires energy, but then there had to be a rearrangement of the shape of the red molecule to actually cut the blue molecule into two. An example about dynamics. I want to show you another example. So proteins don't need an excuse to be dynamic. It's not that I have a protein, I want to chop up a substrate molecule, so the protein has to assume a particular shape that allows it to do that. That's true. But proteins are dynamic all the time. And the reason that they're dynamic all the time is because proteins in the cell, or for that matter, wherever they are being bombarded. They're being bombarded by other molecules. There's an exchange of energy from those other molecules, be they proteins, be they water molecules. Your body has a lot of water. Be they little metabolites. They're going to bash into your protein molecule, exchange energy, and as a consequence, your protein molecule is going to move. So let me just illustrate that here. So there should be some music that you can hear. And we're about to show you, these are atoms in a protein. Remember, these atoms are part of amino acids. The amino acids are the building blocks of protein molecules. There's roughly 20 different flavors of amino acids. You can see the different flavors by the different colors. These amino acids are organized into structures, regular structures. You can see helices in red, and you can see strands of beta sheets in yellow. So they're beautiful pictures that have to deal with the fact that certain amino acids like to interact with each other, and other amino acids like to stay far apart. And that gives rise to a beautiful structure that is highly not static, but is highly dynamic, as molecules are going to bash into them. And the bashing in of molecules exchanges energy with your protein. Your protein, therefore, assumes a particular shape, and that shape can be functional. So it's the bombardment of one molecule with another molecule with another molecule that exchanges energy, and that energy gives rise to function. Without this, we don't have you guys. You wouldn't be able to hear the music that I see some of you are very much enjoying at this time. All of that deals with protein molecules that are aware of their environment, and that occurs in part because different molecules bash into one another. So I want to understand how molecules dance, and I'm going to use magnetism to do that. Do you all know about magnetism? Right? Mom puts a little note on the fridge and sticks it to a magnet. Dear son or daughter, I want you to take out the garbage for the next 3 years and make dinner and take care of all the kids. I'm going to Hawaii. You know, that kind of thing. So the question that you probably have is, why do I choose magnetism to study motion of molecules? That seems sort of crazy. And I'm inspired by a great physicist by the name of Dave Barry, who said that magnetism is one of the 6 fundamental forces of the universe. The other one being gravity. You all know about gravity, right? You've probably dropped something on occasion. It doesn't go up, it goes down. That's gravity. In addition to gravity, there's duct tape, winding, remote control, and the force that pulls dogs towards the groins of strangers. Well, I can't study that. That's not proper anymore these days. But magnetism certainly is one of the fundamental forces, and so I thought that I would look at that. Now, let's just review a little bit about magnetism. How many of you take physics? Very few of you. Physics is important. See this? That's Pauli exclusion, which is named after Pauli, who was one of the greatest physicists. So anytime that you hit something, you're doing physics. Now let's look at another kind of physics that you can do. Let's suppose that we take a magnet. A magnet has a north pole and a south pole. If you can find me a magnet that only has a north pole, you're going to win a Nobel Prize. That's something to think about. But most magnets that I know have both north and south poles. And guess what? The north pole is attracted to the south pole that is attracted to the north pole. 2 north poles don't like each other, and neither do 2 south poles. We all know that. Now, the reason why I use magnetism to actually study my protein molecules is because proteins are made up of little magnets. Every hydrogen, a C13 in a protein, and N15, the hydrogens, the carbons, and the nitrogens are little bar magnets. Now, they're super tiny bar magnets. They're not like the kind of bar magnets that Mom uses to stick on a fridge, but they're magnets nevertheless. They're magnets that obey the laws of quantum mechanics, which is a far-out branch of physics. It is a lot of fun. But again, you have to study physics and math to be able to do it. So these little bar magnets are actually quantum mechanical magnets, and we can use them to understand the dance of molecules. Now, here's how we're going to do it. Let's look at the following situation. Suppose that you have a giant magnet. My giant magnets can cost $10 million and are 500,000 times the size of the Earth's magnetic field. A big magnet. And then you take your protein. Now remember, your protein is made up of amino acids. The amino acids are in turn made up of atoms. These hydrogens are bar magnets. So I put my proteins, my little quantized quantum mechanical bar magnets, into a giant magnetic field that I've just spent $10 million of taxpayers' money on. And what happens? The same things that happens when you bring 2 magnets together. If you have a north pole and a south pole, they attract. If you have 2 north poles, they don't. So let's look at the giant magnet with its big north pole and its big south pole. And then I have little bar magnets. And I would have literally tens of thousands of these little tiny magnets that are associated with my protein molecules. And the state of lowest energy, and we always go to the state of lowest energy. What do I mean by that? I mean, if you have a hell and you have a marble and you let go of the marble, what's going to happen? Is the marble just going to sit there? Some of you say the marble will just sit there if it's at the top of the hell. Do you want to change your answer? If the marble's at the top of the hell, what happens to the marble? It goes up. You guys are messing with me. The marble goes down, right? Down, 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 all the way to the bottom because it's lower energy. Same thing happens if you have a magnet, this little magnet associated with my protein, of which there are many, many, many. It's going to go to the lowest energy state. And the lowest energy state is that the south pole of the little magnet is attracted to the north pole of the big magnet. That's how it works. And then we're going to do an experiment. We're going to do an experiment where we give energy into the system. So the analogy with the marble, which some of you were messing me with, is that if the marble is now at the bottom and you want to bring it up, you have to put energy in, right? So I've got this situation here where my marble is at the bottom. I put energy in. What kind of energy? Magnetic energy. And what happens now is the north is attracted to the north and the south is attracted to the south. And then I watch how the magnet goes back to what I'm going to call an equilibrium position, to the lowest energy position. That gives me information about not only the three-dimensional positions of the atoms, but also about how those three-dimensional positions are going to be changing as a function of time. So you can think about the following. You know about punching bags? Did you have a punching bag when you were little? A sibling. Okay, no, I'm thinking of something more inanimate. A bag, a punching bag, you know, an inanimate kind of thing. Okay, so you have these bags. Let me tell you what they're like if they're not siblings. Okay, you have these bags and you punch them, right? And you transfer energy to the punching bag. And what does the punching bag do? It goes down, right? But it always comes back up, which is a good thing because you're really upset. You've just come home. You got a 99.7 average for grade 12. You're the valedictorian, and you've missed 0.3%. You're really upset. Punch. Punching bag goes down, then the punching bag comes up. And you can punch the punching bag not only head on, but from the side, and with a different frequency, right? Those are all different punches, which are going to have different effects on the punching bag. So me, as a physicist, I can punch my molecules with little magnetic fields, and that's how I go from this position to this position, and it reveals something about the structure of the punching bag, just at the molecular level. Okay? So I develop experiments using math and physics and apply them to molecules. And literally what I do is shown right here. I'm wearing my mask, it's the time of COVID, and I'm punching these molecules in different ways using magnetic energy. And the way the molecule responds depends on its three-dimensional image and how that image changes with time. Now let's look at the following situation. Let's suppose we have a molecule that looks like this. This is actually a molecule that I study, okay? So this is a two-dimensional image of the molecule, and here it is as well. And you can see that the blue parts of the molecule are down here, which I denote like this. This is the arm, and the arm is down. And then they're up here, right? Two different orientations. So here's your hands. Move your hands like this. That's down. Move them up. That's up. And that you're good. And that's important. For example, if somebody throws you a ball, you have to be able to catch the ball. If your hands are like this, what's the odds of catching the ball? Those of you who play football. Is a receiver going to be good if he's got his hands like this? No. That's a problem, right? So where your hands are and where the molecular hands are, it's really important for the molecule to carry out its function. Turns out that these hands are going to catch not footballs, but other protein molecules, act on those protein molecules, and if the hands screw up, you get all sorts of neurodegenerative diseases. Now, let me come back to the concept of this 99.7% that you've just graduated from in grade 12. Suppose that you have a math exam. Let's say, a little math exam, you've just come back from summer holidays, your math teacher says, here's 800 questions, shouldn't take you more than about 25 minutes. You work really hard. You've studied over, as I'm sure many of you have, over the summer break, reviewing all of your math. You get 799 right. Are you happy? Really happy. Right. So now let's suppose that you're the molecule here, and the molecule is made up of 800 amino acids. 799 of them are right. There's one mutation. Is the molecule happy? No. You get neurodegenerative diseases. And so what we do in my lab, with the tools that we've developed, is we look at the arms of the molecule. And what happens with that single mutation, that single wrong answer that you got in your math test, it causes the arms to go up when they're supposed to be down. What we're interested in doing is developing drugs which will move the arms down. And by understanding the dance of these arms, we can design the appropriate drugs which will allow the molecule to behave properly. I want to conclude by saying that science is creative. Learning the rules, as in anything that you do, is hard, and it requires a lot of effort, but the underlying net goal is very rewarding. Don't get discouraged, because now you know that there's 118 elements, much less than 750,000 words. Choose your passion. Your passion can be anything. Every passion is just as good as another passion. Listen to your teachers, but not too much. I remember when I was taking grade 12 chemistry, back turn of the century, even before there was really even chemistry, the teacher used to go to the blackboard and say, okay, now we have these problems. This is how you solve them. Step 1, do this. Step 2, do that. Step 3, do that. I mean, there were so many steps, I forgot that I was even doing chemistry. I thought I was in dance class. Is this what happens to you guys with your chemistry teachers? Step 1, write an equation. Step 2, balance the equation. Step 3, do whatever. Does that sound familiar? So nothing's changed in 50 years? So I went up to my teacher one day and I said, you got to be kidding me. I'm not going to learn your steps. I want to do my steps. And I think that's really important. Each of you has a fresh way of looking at a problem, a new way of looking at a problem, which is going to be really important when those problems have not been solved by other people. So resist the urge to memorize, resist the urge to really focus on other people's steps, and focus on your own. And above all, don't let anybody tell you that you can't do it, because you can. Thank you, and good luck.